Have you ever stopped to consider that maybe it isn't you who thinks, decides, and desires, but an invisible system using your mind as a tool to keep you trapped without noticing? This video will tear through that comfortable layer of illusion and show you, without sugarcoating, how the Gnostic matrix created by the Demiurge infiltrates every automatic thought, every repeated fear, and every identity you defend as me. Here, you will understand, directly and surgically, how to apply Thoth's method to dismantle this programming at the root, reclaim control of your attention, and reconnect with the spark of consciousness that never belonged to this prison. If you truly want to escape the matrix and not just play at awakening, you need to stay until the end, because it's precisely in the final keys that the Demiurge's structure begins to collapse inside you. Have you ever considered the possibility that you're not actually living your own life, making your own decisions, or following your own thoughts, but merely acting out impulses that were never truly yours? What if every movement inside you that you call me is only the echo of an invisible prison designed to keep you from ever discovering who you really are? Hermeticism and Gnosticism have always said the same thing. The world you perceive is not neutral. It is constructed. It is the Gnostic matrix. It is the shadow projected by the Demiurge. And Thoth, the master of primordial wisdom, left the direct method to escape this mental engineering. Today you won't hear metaphors or vague poetry. You're going to receive the escape map. You're going to receive the code that dissolves the illusion's control at the root. And if you stay until the end, you'll understand why the greatest lie of this matrix is not ignorance, but the illusion that you are already awake, when in truth, you're still dreaming inside the dream. Write in the comments, "I break the matrix now." If you want to go deeper, check the benefits and become a member. The Gnostic matrix is not a physical place. It is an imposed system of perception. According to Hermeticism, everything you call reality is a mental vibration. According to Gnosticism, everything you call reality is a distortion of the true spiritual world. The combination of these two keys reveals what Thoth taught directly. You do not escape the prison by changing the prison. You escape by changing the point from which you perceive the prison. The Demiurge, the architect of the illusory world, does not control your soul. He controls your attention. He controls where your mind fixes itself. He controls the narrative you believe is you. This is why the first step of Thoth's method is simple and brutal. Break your identification with everything the Matrix told you that you are. Identity is not essence. Identity is programming. You are not your name, your story, your fears, your desires. All of that is shaped by the world's algorithm. If you believe you are that, you've already lost. The exit door appears when you finally ask, if none of this is me, who is the one observing all of it unfold? Thoth's great Hermetic key is this: the consciousness that observes does not belong to the world, it comes from beyond it. This is the divine spark Gnosticism calls the centelha. It is the only part of the human being the Demiurge cannot touch. That is why the Matrix tries to trap you in mental noise, anxiety, fear, and overstimulation. Because when the mind is crowded, consciousness has no room to perceive itself. The Matrix does not imprison you with chains. It imprisons you with distractions. It keeps you locked inside desires that never resolve, problems that never end, and pursuits that never satisfy. All of this serves a single purpose: to keep you from noticing the difference between your mind and your consciousness. When you notice, you begin to escape. Escape does not happen when the world changes. Escape happens when your perception of the world changes, because the Matrix exists only as long as you believe it is all that exists. Thoth teaches that the Demiurge builds the illusion through three mechanisms: form, repetition, and fear. Form is everything that seems solid but isn't. Repetition is everything that keeps you cycling in the same place while thinking you're advancing. Fear is everything that makes you believe leaving the known is dangerous. When you react automatically to these mechanisms, you reinforce the prison. When you observe them without reacting, you weaken the structure. This is the Gnostic key of non-identification and the Hermetic key of mental neutrality. When you become the constant observer of your own experience, the world loses the power to define who you are. The Demiurge controls the unconscious, but not the conscious observer. The more you return to the observer, the weaker the system becomes. And when you realize you can even observe fear itself, fear loses its dominion over you. Thoth's method consists of 3 inner movements that dismantle the matrix from the inside out. First, realize that everything is mental. The outer world is merely the reflection of the inner. Second, withdraw your energy from the illusion by stopping your automatic reactions to programmed stimuli. Third, direct your consciousness toward the internal spark, the only part that is not imprisoned. What does that mean in practice? It means you stop being moved by the world and begin moving the world through your consciousness. In Hermeticism, this is the principle of correspondence. In Gnosticism, it is the awakening of the divine spark. The matrix only works while you believe it is greater than you. When you realize it is your consciousness that sustains the illusion, everything trembles. When you realize it is your attention that feeds the system, everything weakens. When you realize your essence comes from beyond the world loses authority. You escape the matrix not by changing beliefs, but by realizing beliefs are just codes. You escape not by fighting the Demiurge, but by ceasing to be nourished by him. You escape not by trying to control reality, but by ending the control reality holds over your perception. The matrix wins when you react. It loses when you observe. The matrix wins when you fear. It loses when you understand. The matrix wins when you search outward. It loses when you turn inward. The greatest secret Thoth reveals is that the Demiurge did not create a world to imprison you. He created a world to distract you. The prison is the distraction. The escape is the perception. Liberation is not a change in the world. It is a change in the one who observes the world. Once you understand this, you start seeing how the matrix operates in repetitive thoughts, emotional patterns, automatic beliefs, social narratives, and expectations you assume are yours, but are not. You begin to see that the programming is not trying to destroy you, it's trying to occupy you. It tries to keep you from noticing the spark within you, because if you notice it, the matrix loses you forever. The spark is the only part that does not obey the world's laws. The spark is the only part that does not depend on form. The spark is the only part that does not begin and does not end. And it is this spark Thoth wants you to access, because it is the one that sees the matrix as it truly is. And when you begin accessing this spark, something happens. The matrix tries to pull you back harder. It uses old emotions, old stories, old doubts, but now you know what it is. A reflection pretending to be origin. A shadow pretending to be light. An echo pretending to be a voice. And you begin to understand that true awakening is not beautiful, calm, or comfortable. It is brutal because it requires seeing the world without the filter of conditioning. But it is at this point that Thoth says, continue. Because when you continue even after seeing the illusion, you reach the state Gnosticism calls gnosis. And gnosis is not intellectual knowledge, it is recognition. It is the realization that your consciousness does not belong to the matrix. It never did. It was only watching it. Now observe something. If you are consciousness watching the matrix, who is watching you as you realize this? What part of you exists beyond even perception? Where does that part live? Where does the matrix end? Where does true reality begin? What happens when you discover that the escape is not outward, but inward? What do you think Thoth would reveal if you asked him the next movement of consciousness after seeing through the Demiurge's illusion? What is still left for you to see in the deeper layers of this mental prison that seems so real precisely because it is so convincing? From here, we continue exactly where the previous script ended, entering an even deeper layer of the engineering behind the Gnostic matrix, maintaining full coherence, repeating nothing, and advancing with a new level of clarity. When you begin to perceive the structure of the illusion, an inevitable question arises. How does the Demiurge manage to sustain this system for so long without most people noticing? The answer is simple and brutal. He sustains the matrix by using the human mind itself as fuel. He doesn't create the illusion alone. He makes you recreate it continuously without realizing it. Every automatic thought, every repeated emotion, every imposed belief acts as a brick you place with your own hands in the walls of your prison. Liberation begins when you realize the matrix doesn't imprison you. You unknowingly rebuild it every day because you were never taught how to see from the outside. Thoth teaches that the second level of escape is recognizing how the matrix uses false contrasts to keep you trapped. You think you are choosing between different paths, but all those paths were designed to keep you inside the same circle. Hermeticism calls this controlled duality, when you believe you are choosing between light and shadow, but both belong to the same system. The real exit is not choosing a side. It is seeing that both sides are part of the same mental construction. The Demiurge does not imprison you with darkness. He imprisons you with options that look liberating, but still belong to the same board. When you see this, your mind begins to step outside the box, not because it found an answer, but because it perceives that all the answers offered were distractions. The next movement in Thoth's method is understanding that the matrix doesn't control your soul. It controls your interpretation of experience. It doesn't block the truth. It distorts it. It doesn't hide the exit. It places thousands of false doors in front of it. This is why Thoth speaks of the inner eye. It is not a poetic symbol, but the ability to perceive reality without the narrative imposed by the system. When you see without filtering, without judging, without projecting, you realize reality is not what you thought it was. The matrix loses strength when you stop interpreting and start observing. The prison is not in what you see, it's in the meaning you were conditioned to assign to what you see. When the meaning collapses, the illusion loses structure. Pure Gnosticism reveals that the Demiurge did not create this world to be evil. He created it as an imperfect copy of the real. The problem is that he believes his copy is the original. This means everything here is limited because it was born from ignorance, not malice, and that is what traps you. A world convinced it is complete when it is not. A system trying to persuade you that the human is the limit of the divine. Thoth dismantles this by saying, if something has a limit, it cannot be truth. Truth does not limit itself. Consciousness does not limit itself. Your essence does not limit itself. What limits you is the mold of the matrix. And once you perceive the mold, you begin breaking it not through external rebellion, but through internal lucidity. The next stage of escape is realizing that the matrix captures you through self-images. It creates a version of you that you begin to protect. This image is the strongest prison because you believe it's who you are. Thoth teaches that to escape, you must dissolve this image completely without destroying your emotional structure. This means dropping fixed identities, social roles, and personal narratives that were imposed on you. When you release this image, you create the space needed to perceive the divine spark operating. This is the part of the human being that does not identify with anything the matrix offers, and that is precisely why most people ignore it. Escape begins when you choose the spark instead of the image. Hermeticism says that everything that exists obeys the principle of vibration. This means the matrix only controls you because you vibrate within the frequency where it operates. When your vibration rises, not in the superficial, mystical sense, but in the sense of mental clarity and direct perception, the matrix loses its reach. It becomes like trying to hold smoke with your hands. The higher the consciousness, the less impact the system has. Thoth explains that the Demiurge operates within the bandwidth of mental density, reactive thought, and heavy emotion. When you shift into a state of constant observation, your vibration rises automatically. And when that happens, you don't need to escape the matrix. It simply can't reach you on that level. Gnosticism deepens this by stating that the Demiurge only operates in the lower layers of the mind, the layers where fear, guilt, compulsive desire, and repetition exist. He cannot reach the upper layer where pure consciousness resides. This is why Thoth's method emphasizes the isolation of consciousness, not physical isolation, but isolation of attention. You withdraw attention from automatic narratives and place it on direct perception. At that moment, you stop being part of the game and become the observer of the game. And the observer is never trapped. The observer is never affected. The observer is always free. The matrix controls characters, not the observer. Now you begin to see something even deeper. The system functions like a broken mirror. It reflects fragments of reality, but never the whole. This is why you feel something missing, even when everything seems fine. That sensation is not a flaw. It is the sign that your essence is perceiving the falseness of the reflection. Thoth's method transforms that sensation into power. Instead of trying to fill the lack with external things, you use the lack as a guide. The lack points to the real. The lack points to the spark. The lack points to what exists beyond the matrix. When you follow this impulse, you enter the path of Gnostic awakening, the path the Demiurge cannot block, because he does not understand the origin of the lack. The lack is the memory of the real. Thoth reveals that the matrix traps you through psychological time. It keeps you living in the past and the future so that you never notice the present. The present is the only crack in the matrix, the only breach where it cannot operate. When you are fully present, all control mechanisms collapse. The Demiurge does not control the now. He controls the mind that runs away from the now. This is why Thoth's method includes mastery of present attention as the primary weapon. The present dissolves conditioning, destroys narratives, and prevents illusion from sustaining itself. When you remain present long enough, you feel something strange. The world loses depth, as if it is only a surface layer. This is not delusion. It is clarity. When this clarity emerges, you realize that the matrix is sustained not by force, but by unconscious consent. You consent to the illusion every time you react without awareness. You consent when you believe automatic thoughts. You consent when you identify with emotions. But when you withdraw that consent, silently, internally, the system weakens. Thoth's method teaches refusal not through rebellion, but through lucidity. It is the soft but absolute refusal. This is not me. Every time you say internally, this is not me, you remove one piece of the matrix within you. The next step in escape is seeing that the matrix doesn't operate only mentally. It operates through the energetic body. According to Hermeticism and Kabbalah, the energetic body is the field where your consciousness and the illusion interact. When that body is dense, the matrix affects you more. When it is clear, it affects you less. Thoth explains that the energetic body becomes clear when you reduce mental noise, when you observe instead of react, when you breathe consciously. This is not superficial mysticism. It is spiritual engineering. Density pulls you into the matrix. Clarity pulls you out of it. Gnosticism adds a point few understand. The matrix does not fear your knowledge. It fears your recognition. Many people study, read, accumulate theory, but remain trapped because they only stored information inside the matrix. What liberates is not knowing, it is seeing. And seeing is what the Demiurge cannot allow without the system beginning to crumble. That is why Thoth teaches that you must apply knowledge, not just collect it. Application begins when you observe reality without getting lost in it, when you see the game without being the player, when you see the illusion without identifying with it. And a deeper truth appears. The matrix is not the enemy of consciousness. It is the challenge that awakens consciousness. It is the resistance that strengthens the soul. It is the contrast that reveals the spark. This is why Thoth never taught destroying the matrix. He taught transcending it. It is not about breaking the walls. It is about realizing the walls were never solid. It is about realizing you were believing in shadows. It is about realizing your essence was never trapped. It is about realizing liberation is not a destination. It is a recognition. And the more you recognize, the more the matrix tries to pull you back with doubts, fatigue, distractions, old feelings, old stories. But now you know these are not signs of regression. They are signs of progress. The Demiurge does not fight those who are asleep. He fights those who are waking up. This means every resistance that arises is proof that you are getting closer to the core of the illusion. And the closer you get, the more you realize the truth was always inside, never outside. As consciousness expands, you begin to notice there's a point where the matrix simply cannot operate. The point where you realize that nothing in this world completes your essence because your essence is not of this world. This is where gnosis truly begins. And when gnosis begins, you see the matrix as a scenario, not as reality. You see the Demiurge as a limited creator, not an authority. You see your own being as far too vast to fit inside the forms this world imposes. And then the inevitable question arises, if the matrix is only mental vibration, what happens when you completely change your vibration? If the matrix depends on your attention, what happens when you withdraw your attention from it entirely? If the Demiurge controls the illusion, but cannot control the spark, what happens when you begin acting from the spark instead of the conditioned mind? And if that transition has already begun inside you as you read this, what exactly is beginning to awaken behind your thoughts right now? What part of you is about to see what the matrix has spent a lifetime trying to hide? From here, we continue exactly where we left off, entering an even more technical layer of Thoth's method for escaping the Gnostic matrix. At this stage, it's no longer enough to understand that the matrix exists. You must understand its architecture as a spiritual engineer. The matrix is a set of apparent laws that seem absolute, but only apply to those hypnotized by the system. Thoth reveals that the Demiurge built this system using a combination of beliefs, emotional patterns, and false spiritual laws. When you accept these laws as truths, you submit yourself to the jurisdiction of the matrix. When you see that they are merely internal rules of a limited game, you begin to operate above it, as the consciousness observing, not as a piece inside it. Hermeticism shows that every layer of illusion is supported by a misinterpreted principle. For example, the principle of cause and effect is real, but the matrix distorts it into mechanical karma, where you feel eternally chained to mistakes and guilt. Thoth teaches that the karma of the matrix is nothing more than unconscious repetition. Once you become conscious, you are no longer trapped in the blind cycle of cause and effect because you begin acting with intention and lucidity. The Demiurge keeps the game running through automatism. Thoth breaks the game through awareness. The escape is not avoiding causes. It is creating new causes outside the programming from the spark, not from fear, not from guilt, not from lack. Kabbalah deepens this by showing that the world of the matrix is a cropped fragment of the tree of life, focused only on the densest layers of experience. The Demiurge traps you in a few internal sephirot: survival, desire, status, repetition of routine. He wants you to live only on the surface, without climbing the tree. In Kabbalistic language, Thoth's method is the movement of return, leaving the fragmented vision and beginning to reconnect the levels of consciousness. As you begin to ascend internally, you realize that the world you once called real was only a very narrow band of the spectrum of existence. The matrix is the limitation of the spectrum. Awakening is its expansion. Here is a point almost no one notices. The matrix needs you to believe everything is literal. It kills the symbol. It kills the myth. It kills the archetype. Because symbols are doors out of the system, Thoth is, in himself, a living symbol of consciousness that transcends illusion. When you interact with deep symbols, not as superstition but as perception keys, you begin accessing layers of reality that do not obey the rules of the matrix. Illusion only dominates those who see only the literal. The Gnostic and the Hermetic escape because they see the code behind the form, the message behind the object, the function behind the scene. Another essential point in the method: the Demiurge traps you through the obvious. Anything that feels too obvious has already been chosen for you by the matrix. Thoth forces you to distrust the obvious, not with paranoia, but with lucidity. If everyone thinks the same way about something, that thought was probably injected. Collective thoughts are almost never authentic. The way out is to create a space between stimulus and reaction, between information and acceptance. This space is called sovereignty of consciousness. It is the point at which you say, I will not automatically believe anything handed to me, not even my own initial reactions. This is where the free mind begins. Gnosticism states that the world of the Demiurge is a poorly made copy of the original. Thoth's method uses this strategically. Everything that produces contraction, fear, compression, or a sense of closing belongs to the copy. Everything that produces expansion, clarity, lucid peace belongs to the real. You don't need an external manual to discern the origin of an inner movement. Your own energetic field reveals it. The matrix tightens, restricts, suffocates, speeds up anxiously. Contact with the real dilates, quiets, expands, and slows you down without numbing you. Once you start using this sensory discernment, you stop being fooled by the matrix's superficial shine because you learn to feel the origin of the vibration behind the form. Thoth also reveals that language is one of the matrix's weapons. Words are used to build invisible prisons. For example, when you say, I am like this, you are fixing your soul into a mental mold. The Demiurge loves definitive, closed, eternal statements because they turn movement into captivity. Thoth's Hermetic method is to change your internal grammar. Instead of saying, I am this, you begin saying, I am experiencing this. It seems like a detail, but it's not. I am fixes. I am experiencing freeze. The matrix needs fixed identities to maintain control. Consciousness needs transient states to remain free. Another advanced point, the matrix is a system of value assignment. It defines what is worthwhile and what isn't. It defines what success is and what failure is. It defines what is acceptable and what is shameful. If you accept its ruler, you accept the game. Thoth's method consists in removing from the matrix the right to tell you what has value. From then on, it is your spark that defines the value of things. This breaks the bond of submission. As long as the Demiurge defines what is important, you are a servant. When your consciousness defines it, you become the master of your own inner axis, free from imposed measures. At the deepest level, the matrix needs you to fear yourself, your shadows, your impulses, your uncertainties, because if you look directly at these things, you discover there is no monster at all, only misunderstood energy. Thoth teaches that facing your own shadow is not a psychological luxury. It is an act of spiritual warfare against the matrix. As long as you flee from the shadow, the matrix uses that flight as fuel. When you face it, the energy that sustained the prison returns to you. Integrated shadow is escape power. Denied shadow is captivity. Hermeticism shows that the Demiurge always operates in mass. The matrix is collective. Gnosis is intimate. This means your liberation will never be a process that the collective approves of. It will be silent, internal, often incomprehensible to those who still live through the system's mind. Thoth warns that one of the matrix's tests is using others' opinions to pull you back into programming. When you begin to step out, criticism comes, misunderstanding comes, attempts to ridicule your inner search arise. All of this is the matrix trying to restore the original status. The method is firm. You do not debate with the matrix. You do not negotiate with the matrix. You simply keep growing until nothing it says holds authority inside you. Deeper still, the matrix offers you a false spirituality, one that offers comfort, pleasant confirmations, flattering spiritual ego narratives, but does not touch the structure of the prison. Thoth, in contrast, offers lucid discomfort. He does not massage the ego, he dismantles it. He does not protect beliefs, he tests them. He does not give you a spiritual title, he removes them all. And this is precisely what frees you. Any spirituality that strengthens the identity of a special self is still under the Demiurge's dominion. Real gnosis weakens the character and strengthens consciousness. You do not escape by inflating the self, but by seeing that the self is transient. Kabbalah brings a powerful image Jacob's ladder, a bridge between planes. The Matrix wants you to believe only the rung you stand on exists. Thoth's method forces you to look upward and inward at the same time. Every real insight is a rung climbed. Every time you refuse an automatic pattern, you climb another. The ladder is inside your perception. The Demiurge tries to convince you there is no ladder, only ground. The Hermetic and the Gnostic see the ladder at all times, not as fantasy, but as a real shift in levels of consciousness. Another core of the method, the Matrix traps you through urgency. The Demiurge uses artificial haste to keep you reactive. Everything is for yesterday. Everything is now or never. Everything is last chance. Why? Because haste cancels presence. And without presence, you fall back into automatic mode. Thoth operates in the opposite direction. He slows your perception. He shows you that in consciousness, nothing is late. What needs to unfold arrives in perfect rhythm when you see clearly. Escaping the Matrix requires the courage to slow down in a system that worships speed. True urgency is not about external time. It is about how long you remain unconscious of yourself. Gnosticism says the Demiurge is blind to the highest dimension of reality. He cannot see what lies beyond his own creation. This means that when you begin acting from that higher dimension, from the spark, from presence, from pure consciousness, you become literally invisible to certain mechanisms of the Matrix. Situations that once dominated you lose access to your energy. Old patterns stop finding you, not because the world changed, but because you stepped off the vibrational radar of specific gears of the system. Thoth's method is not theatrical, it is surgical, a crucial point. The Matrix will always try to convince you that you are going too far, that it's exaggeration, paranoia, overcomplication. This is a defense mechanism of the system. It wants you to go back to sleep, convinced that things are simpler than you are seeing. Thoth does the opposite. He shows you how deep conditioning runs. He shows you the construction is more complex than it appears. But at the same time, he simplifies the only real exit: continuous lucidity, continuous presence, continuous non-identification. The path is simple. The prison is complex. The Matrix wants to invert this in your mind. Another key, the Demiurge uses unresolved suffering as glue. Everything you refuse to feel, everything you push down, becomes a point of fixation for the Matrix inside you. Thoth does not promise escape without pain. He promises escape through the conscious traversing of pain. When you welcome pain with presence, without story, without victimhood, you dissolve the glue. What once bound you becomes fuel. This is real alchemy, transforming weight into power, wound into insight, fall into comprehension. Hermeticism calls this transmutation. Gnosticism calls it the return to fullness. The Matrix calls it danger. Thoth's method also shows that in the Matrix, almost everything is designed to keep you out of yourself. Endless content, non-stop distraction, constant noise. It is not accidental. The Matrix fears inner silence because silence is where the spark becomes audible. Thoth uses silence as spiritual technology. It is not the silence of absence, it is the silence of full presence. When you enter this state, even for a few seconds, you realize something shocking. You are not the mind's noise. And if you are not the noise cannot command you. This single perception begins to break years of programming. And then you see, the real escape is not physical, not geographical, not social. It is a shift of center. You stop being the character and become the consciousness that perceives the character. The body remains, the world remains, the functions remain, but something changes in the internal command. The Demiurge never programmed you to discover this center. He programmed you to lose yourself in roles. When you return to the center, you leave the field of control. And that is where the real journey begins. Because you begin living in the world without belonging to it, using the scenery without being used by it, touching the Matrix without being touched by it. And as this consciousness awakens, a new silent pact begins. From this moment on, Every time you notice the matrix trying to pull you back, you will remember this moment. You will remember that there is a hermetic path, a science of the mind, a living gnosis that does not depend on belief, but on direct vision. Subscribing to this channel is not just a click, it is the seal that you recognize yourself as an initiate in process, someone who no longer accepts ready-made answers and is willing to walk with Thoth through the path of extreme self-knowledge. Subscribing here is like entering an invisible temple. No one sees it from the outside, but inside, the consciousness begins to shift to another level. In the end, everything comes down to a choice. Continue living as a character obeying the laws of the imperfect copy, or assume yourself as a conscious spark that begins remembering the path back to the real. The journey does not end here. It has only opened another layer. From now on, every time you think of I, you may silently ask, who is observing this I? Every time the world tries to swallow you, you may use the Hermetic mind as shield and sword. And as you continue walking this path with Thoth, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The Matrix has no power over those who remember they never belonged to it. Subscribe to this channel as someone who crosses the threshold of an inner school of wisdom, not out of lack, but out of recognition. If you felt the call, you're already part of this invisible brotherhood. Final echo: the consciousness that sees the Matrix is no longer of the Matrix.